All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Jim Crispino. I'm the Senior Director of Developer Evangelism here, working on the App Foundry team. And I get to introduce you to process automation event triggers today. I'm joined by Tyler Bath. And Tyler, you want to just introduce yourself, give everybody what your title is and what you do at Genesys?
Hey there, yeah, I'm a senior software engineer at Genesys, working on our integrations team, and I'm one of the main developers on this process automation project.
All right. All right. So Tyler's going to join me. He's going to keep me honest. Tyler, if I say anything out of line, please feel free to just barge in and set me straight. All right, before we get started, everybody, as always, there's a few logistics. I'm going to try and save 10 minutes at the end of this tutorial. I've got a lot to cover today, so I'll do my best to save that time out. But we are recording this. It will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. You can see this video and any of our previous devcasts, our dev drop video series, several others by going to our developer center at developer.genesys.cloud/video. All right, with that, I am done with the slides. As always, I am not a slide person. So let me share. Let me get rid of those slides and I'll share my other screen in this slideshow. Share this screen. That's not the screen I want to share. 1 second. Share this screen, get this off. All right. Today, I am going to talk to you about process automation triggers. This is a fairly new technology. It has been GA for, I don't know, a few months now, but it's an API. Right now, it's purely an API. So you really, if you weren't looking for it, you may not even notice it's there. But if you go to our developer center, and I'm sorry, I'm going to look on this screen most of the time over here, so you're going to see my side profile. I'm going to go to, not App Foundry. I'm sorry. I'm so used to doing that every day. That's what I work in. I'm going to go to the API Explorer, and under the platform part of the table of contents there, you will see process automation over here. And I would encourage you after this webinar to come to this section and just review the information that's here. There's a lot of great there's a great overview that talks about triggers, how they work, what events you can trigger off of. So we have, if you were with me last month, I talked about the notification API and all the events that are available there and how those are available on EventBridge as well. We created some new topics specifically for process automation, but these topics are also available on the other channels. But these were primarily created for triggers to make our conversation model a little bit easier to consume for the purpose of what we design triggers for. So triggers are designed to monitor events that happen in the contact center around conversations. When does a conversation start? When does the agent join? When does the agent leave? When did the customer leave? After the customer or after the agent wraps up, we wanted to trigger those events. And when we trigger those events, you can perform an action. It's kind of an, if this happens, then do this. So the topics are the part of the if statement, right? If this event and other properties of the conversation are true, then perform some action. So first is the topic that you're looking at, and then the next part of it is the match criteria for a trigger. So the match criteria, we have a JSON object that's delivered with that event. It is a trimmed down conversation object. It is pretty much just the top level properties of a conversation object. So you're not going to get all deep down in the participant objects and stuff. You're going to get some top level items to key off of to do matching. So we use a JSON path to be able to parse through that object, and you can have operators. We have a number of operators available. And so you can check a property against the operator for a value. And if that matches, then the if statement is true and it'll follow on to the action. You can have multiple match criteria. So you don't have to have just one. You can key off of multiple ones, but this paragraph is key to that. Our match criteria is all ands. So if you have multiples, they all have to be true for it to match. If you want to do ors, you have to jump through a few hoops, use certain kind of operators in your conditions to match in order to be ors. So then, so we talked about the if. You've got the event that happens. Does it match my criteria? Yes, it does. Now I want to perform some action. Right now, those actions are workflows. So in Architect, you guys are probably familiar with call flows and email flows and chat flows and bot flows. We have just general purpose workflows, okay? And those can be triggered off of these process automation triggers. So when your match criteria, when you're triggering your match criteria match, we can start the execution of a workflow. And in the workflow is where you do all the fun stuff. That's where you actually perform whatever action. But we'll kick that workflow off and that'll run. So I talked about the trimmed down event. So we do not send the entire conversation JSON. That's a huge payload. It just, for all the data flowing through the event trigger mechanism, that was a huge payload to dig through and consume and parse. So we came up with a condensed conversation event model specifically for event triggers. So it was easier to tell what state that a conversation was in and what properties it had. So you get, when the event occurred, the conversation ID, how it disconnected, what media type it is. That's usually a key one, right? Maybe you want to watch all calls that end, right? So you would want to key off of media type. You might want to only key off of inbound or outbound. You might want to look at Annie or DNIS for a call, or address to and address from for an email or a chat or a message type. If it's a message type, you might want to know what kind of message type is it. Maybe you only want to look at message types of SMS. Maybe you only want to know about SMS transactions and do something on those. And then the very last property, and this one's kind of, you can do some interesting stuff with this, is the interaction duration. So maybe you want to set a match criteria for only watching all calls that lasted more than 5 seconds or something like that, because you figured those weren't, if they were less than that, they weren't valid calls. So all of these properties are available to be passed into the workflow. So you can, all of these will be available to you if you want to use them, so that once you're in the workflow, you can do even more ifs and switches and conditional logic to look at things, look at properties of that conversation, and do some additional filtering in the workflow to take some action. So again, I'd encourage you to come read this. We have an example of a trigger here. You tell the topic that when you define the trigger, you have to tell what topic you're watching. You have to specify the match criteria if you have any. You may not have any, but if you have some, like this one watches all outbound voice calls that were less than 1 second. And when that match criteria matches, it will invoke a certain workflow. So, and then we have just the APIs, and I'm going to show you all of these today. That's interesting. Those did not get favorited. Let me add those. So we've got a number of APIs, and I'm gonna walk through, I think, the majority of these today. So we'll see. So before I get started, triggers, since they're an API, there's really nothing to watch. There's nothing I can bring up that'll show you data flowing through the Genesys backend and matching triggers and everything. So I wanted to show you guys the result, right? The triggers, one of the key use cases here is when a agent dispositions a call, you may want to update a CRM system or some third-party system with information about that conversation that happened with the disposition. So, you might watch the after call work event and trigger off of that. And where was I? Oh, that's hard for me to show. I don't have a CRM system that I can just spin up and show you us updating data in that at the end of the call. So what I did, let me show you. I'm going to walk through some of the setup here just so you understand what I did. I created a group. I went to admin groups and I created a public group called DevCast. So this is just a chat room. We have an integration where we can post messages into chat rooms. We use this here at Genesys. We post stuff from our Jira system into chat rooms. We post support stuff into chat rooms. When you guys ask a question on the forum, that goes into a chat room. We all monitor these chat rooms. So the chat rooms are pretty impressive in what you can use them for. I went to admin and I went to integrations and I clicked add, and we have generic chat notification integration, and I installed that. Let me show you what I have set up there. It's interesting. I got a couple of errors there. All right, so if I go to integrations and put in DevCast here, I've got trigger notifications. So what I said was post into that chat room. So there's a URL for that, and I said called it DevCast triggers, and I'm gonna post into that DevCast chat. I don't have any filter criteria. Messages can have filter criteria. I'm just going to post anything that comes to this webhook will go into there. All right. Now to trigger that webhook from a workflow, I needed a data action. So let me show you that data action real quick. So I made a data action. It's just a general purpose. It's just a general purpose web service data action. So I came in here. A chat post into a group needs a message and metadata. Those are the two properties of that. And I put the webhook URL from the integration in here, and I'm just sending the body of the message and the metadata to that. And we can test that real quick. I can say, hi, this is Jim, and I can put some metadata. The metadata is not going to show up, but I can run that data action. Well, okay, so it ran, and if you notice over here, I got a little splat on my chat. So if I go over there, DevCast, and I scroll down, hey, there's this hi, it's Jim. So I know that I've got all the infrastructure set up for the workflow to post into my chat room. So let me show you the workflow real quick. We're working backwards here, folks. So we'll get to triggers here in just a minute. So I created a couple of different workflows under Architect. If you go to the workflow section, you can create workflows, and we're gonna start with this customer start one here. So it's a very simple workflow. I don't really do any checking of any of the data here, but I do have my data action. It's going to pass in the message and the metadata that my data action needs. And I crafted a little piece of text to show DevCast. I'm showing that this is the customer started trigger. I'm showing the conversation ID and the media type. Now, I told you those properties from that conversation object that the triggers fire, those properties are available within your workflow. So you can see I'm calling flow.conversation ID and flow.media type. Those are defined over here under the data. So I had to explicitly say that I wanted conversation ID and media type, that I wanted variables. So I created a variable. I told it was an input to the flow. So that trigger, when it invokes this workflow, it's automatically going to populate, it's automatically going to send in all those properties. But I, as the workflow designer, have to say that I want to use those. So I said, I'm only interested for now in conversation ID and media type, but I can add any of those other properties, Annie, DNS, address to, address from, duration, all of those are available as long as I create variables and mark them as input to flow. Then I can use them inside of the flow. Now, one other thing I'm going to point out here, I'm not going to do this today because we're going to run out of time, but you can call pure cloud data, sorry, Genesys Cloud data actions from in here as well. So if you were to drop in, since you have conversation ID, you can call it the Genesys Cloud API v2 conversations ID and get the full JSON object should you need it. So in the workflow, you can get that entire JSON and operate off of it and do decisions off of the entire full conversation JSON. All right, so with that, we kind of have the infrastructure set up for what I wanted to show you today. So we've got our group. We're going to post messages into our group. We created our data action that is going to facilitate posting messages into that group from our workflow. We've got a workflow set up. So now we just need to design the trigger. So I'm going to hop over to this browser instance. And here, this is where I was showing you the APIs, but I have them in a second tab here also. I start each of them. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but these APIs, the star is yellow instead of just being an unfilled star. So because I bookmarked those are available to me in the toolbox. Let me collapse that. I'll show you. You guys may not notice this, but in the developer center, when you're in any of the APIs, you get this little toolbox here. So if you expand that, I made it take up the whole space. It shows all the APIs that I'm going to be working with today. So these are the ones that I'm interested in. So I've favorited them, and so they're available to me in the toolbox, and I can execute on them. So the first one I'm going to start off with is just getting a list of the currently defined process automation triggers. This is just a simple get. If you were doing paging, you can put that in there. If you want to filter on topics, if you want to filter all triggers that are listening on a specific topic, you can do that. But I'm just going to go get all of them. And it comes back with a 200 OK. And I only have one. So I already created a trigger to have available to show you guys. It is a customer start trigger. So this will fire when a conversation lands at Genesys, when the customer hits Genesys. So my topic name is that topic, V2 details, events, conversation ID, customer start. And you'll notice on a lot of our events, if you're using the notification API or, well, specifically the notification API, usually you replace the curly brackets with an ID. That's not the case with process automation triggers. You probably can, technically, but if you leave it with the curly braces, it will match on any conversation ID. It's kind of like a wild card. So it's really cool. You can just say, I want to watch all calls that start. So it's really a nice feature. I've specified my target. The workflow is this ID. Let me show you how to get that ID real quick, because that's not entirely obvious. You can use our APIs. We have architect APIs. You can query all the defined flows and you can go look for one by name. But if you're bringing up architect in a browser and you just look at the URL right after the flows path, part of the path, that up until the latest, that is your ID of the flow. You know, we use REST. You guys know that. So we used typical REST pathing there, and so you can grab that. You can grab that ID right from there, and so you can see it ends in ACA, and that's what should match here. It ends in ACA, and so I'm going to trigger that workflow when this trigger fires. I do not have any match criteria for right now. We will define one with match criteria here in a moment. This one is enabled. It is running. You can disable triggers if you're kind of testing and you're not sure you want to put it in production yet. You know, you turn it on, test a little bit, turn it off. So you can put a description. I would highly recommend put a description in so that somebody looking at this who is not you can know what this does without kind of trying to decipher everything. So this trigger's already there. Let's look at it in action. So I'm going to come back over to this browser instance because I am logged in as an agent. And I'm going to go to my interactions panel. So you guys are probably all used to this. Your agents come here. I'm going to turn on, go on queue, and I'm going to start with a chat interaction. So let me drag this over here so you can see what I'm doing. So I've got the developer tools open, and I'm just going to start a chat. Coming in as Roxy Barone. And I apologize for my internet, folks. I hope the screens are keeping up and you guys are seeing everything. Let's just give this a second. All right. So the chat started. It is alerting in me. If I wasn't on queue, it would just be in queue and the trigger would have fired anyway. So it's when the customer lands, not when the agent, my trigger is not when the agent answered. My trigger is when the customer starts the conversation. So my trigger fired and the workflow ran and the workflow called my data action and the data action called the webhook integration to post into my chat room. And that's what I got. So I have here that a customer started a conversation. Here's the conversation ID and the media type. So I hope that you guys can mentally put that together that, yeah, I don't need to put it in a chat room. I could call Salesforce and create a new activity record, or I could create a ticket in Zendesk, or I could, do whatever. So you can make any API request to a third-party system using data actions out of Genesys Cloud, in a workflow. So that's what we're working on today. So I've got that working. Let me go back to my interactions panel and I'm going to hang up that chat and I'm going to process that. And my chat's ended. So just so you guys can see, the same thing will happen off of a call. So let me start a call here.
Hello. Thanks for calling the Dev Foundry. You are at the main menu. Press 1 to transfer to an agent.
1.
Press 9 to Please wait while I find an available agent.
So here comes a call. I'm going to answer that call. That on mute so we don't get feedback. And you'll see this time my trigger fired again because I don't have any match criteria. It's simply when a conversation starts. So that's all conversations in the contact center. But the properties, we could have filtered off of properties, and you can see the media type property is different for this. It's a voice call. So the media type property was voice. Let me go ahead and hang that up and I'll come back over here. And I'm just going to go through a couple more here. Let me process that. Okay, I have an email here. I've got email to my contact center. Let me send that in. And I just want to go through all of these and I'll show you real quick. So I'm not going to answer this email. I'll just disconnect it and process. And we should have an email conversation start over here, and we do. So there's the email. And then the last one I'm going to do is an open messaging test. This is open messaging. Let me send that in. All right, let me answer that. All right, so we've got our open messaging, and I'll just cancel that as well and process. All right, so we've kind of run through the majority of media types that we have. So you can see the triggers fire on all of them. And I could have looked at the message type property. I could have brought that into my workflow and had an extra line. So if it was a message interaction, I could have sent out what kind of message, and it would have been labeled as open because I was using open messaging. If I would have sent a text in, it would have been message media type with a message type of SMS. So, all right, now let's go create a trigger. Let's go create a brand new trigger. I need to bring up this here, and I'm going to go to a post operation here. Let me find the right one here. So this is the post operation to create a trigger. And I'm pretty sure that's the one I wanted. Customer start. No, that's customer start. So I want to do customer end. So let me show you how I've been doing this. I have my start one here, but I'm gonna drop this in, and I'm gonna take a few properties away because this is, I want to do a create. So I'm going to create an end trigger. All right, so on this one, I'm going to create an end trigger. It's going to key off of when the customer ends, not when the agent drops off, but when the customer hangs up, closes the chat, whatever. When the customer ends the conversation, I'm going to invoke a different workflow. This one is not the A6A, this is A68. This is going to call my customer end workflow that I have, which it really is the same function. It's going to post into my chat room. I'm going to let this one be enabled, and I have match criteria on this one. So on this one, if the media type is a chat, then I'm going to trigger off of this one. So we should only, if I do chats, we should get this trigger. If I do a call, this should not work. So let me go ahead and execute that. All right, we got a 200 okay. It created that. It gave me an ID for the trigger. It gave me the self URL. So it created it. Let's just go make sure. And if I go to the API where I can get all the triggers, and if I execute that, all right, so now I have two triggers. I have the first one that I had, the customer start one. I also have the customer end trigger. So that's keying off of media type equals chat. So how do I know that these are going to work, right? I can send in calls, right? I could send in calls, I can send in chats, I can send in conversations and test them. But we do have some APIs. And I gotta find which one it is. Is it this one? Test. So this is the trigger with an ID test. All right, let me go grab one of those IDs. Grab the start one. Actually, before I do that one, let's do this one. So this one's kind of fun. So let me grab a topic name. I'm going to go back to my APIs and my triggers and my customer start. I want that ID for the topic. So I'm going to come back to my API. I'm going to put my topic name in here. I want to know what triggers will trigger if this topic happens. And I can have a request body. I wonder why that did not come over. Give me 1 second. I think I did that in another test. Process automation, triggers, test, matching a trigger based on event body, given a topic. Let me grab this copy. I'll put this over here. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to pretend that Genesys is firing this event, and instead of filling out the entire conversation object, I'm just going to fill out a couple of key properties, and I'm going to execute my request. And what this does is it runs through all the triggers that I have, and it runs through a couple of tests. It said validated the test event body against the topic schema. That came out true. It checked the match criteria of all the triggers based on the body that I sent in of my conversation object. And because of that, it says, all right, look, these triggers are the ones that matched. So in this case, I was testing customer start. I should expect my customer start trigger to fire. So that's good. Let's go up and change that to customer end. And let's run it again. And it runs through the test again. This time it said, hey, yeah, you were filtering on customer end. and your trigger matched all the match criteria. And it matched because my input to this test had chat. What if I put voice in here? I put voice in here and I execute that and I go through customer end on voice. Well, that should not have matched because my match criteria said, let's go make sure what my match criteria said. My match criteria said media type equal chat. I may have something wrong there. Let's try it in these tools. So if I do conversation, I know it was working on this one. It's still matched there. Interesting. Well, let's go. Sorry. Let's go see if this is actually true. Let's send in a chat and let's send in a call and see what we get. So I'll start with the chat. Let me send in a chat here. All right, let me answer that. So we got a customer started event. All right, I've got the chat. I'm going to end that as the customer. I'm going to end it as the agent. And let's go see what we got. So we should have got a customer started and a customer ended in our chat room. So now let's try a call. If I got my match criteria right, I should not get an end event for this call.
Hello. Thanks for calling the Dev Foundry. You are at the main menu. Press 1 to transfer to an agent. Press 9 to Please wait while I find an available agent.
Wait for it. All right, so I have the call. I'll go ahead and end this and process that. And let's go check our chat room. So, well, it worked. So I got the started for the voice, but I did not get the ended for the voice because my match criteria shows that. So, so it didn't match the match criteria because I was only looking for those interactions that have chat as a media type. So we didn't get a message in that case. So I'm going to create a couple more triggers here. So let me go to my post. And I'm going to drop two more in here. I want to do an agent start and an agent end, and they're named. They're not named agent start and agent end, but that's essentially what they are. They're called user start and user end because in Genesys technically it's a user. You have a user ID. So they're a user, so the naming is user start and user end. All right, so I'm not going to put any match criteria on this one. I'm just going to say when an agent joins a conversation, I want to be notified, and it's going to call yet another workflow. I've got a user start workflow. Let me execute this. All right, we got a 200 OK. I'm going to put one more trigger body in there. Guess I should point out I'm kind of using the cheat method of dropping stuff into the editor. If you guys really want to go through, you can use the fields over here to modify the properties in the black editor box. I tend to just like to type JSON because I know what the JSON should look like, and I put that in. I find it easier for me. Execute this and I'll create that last trigger. So this is an user end. So assuming everything's in, everything was put in. I started everything off as enabled. So I should be able to go back to my Genesys Cloud instance. I'll get on the interactions panel. Let me get over here, bring my chat form back on. So because I'm using chat, the only one that's filtering on chat is the customer end. I should get 4 events this time. So I'm gonna click start, come in as Roxy again. Let me answer that chat. All right. I'm gonna end that chat and process it. And if I come over here, scroll down, we got user ended. We didn't get user started. That's interesting. Let's go look at our trigger. Let's go get all the triggers and see what we've got. We have customer start. We have user end. We have user start. User start and customer end. Now let's just see. Make sure I got that right. Copy that. We'll put that into post. That's the trigger ID when this is the overall one. Let's execute on user start. Should that have fired? It does say it should have fired my user start. It is very possible that my workflow for that one isn't right. So let's just verify. This is good, as always, to see how one would troubleshoot something. So we didn't get the user start. Let's verify that I'm using the right call flow. So this one ends in 81B. If I go look at my triggers, user start ends in 81B. Well, I'm going to run out of time here to show you guys to troubleshoot this. Let's just give me another minute or two. Let's figure this out. So got, let's just try, see if it was a fluke. Maybe the trigger didn't update quick enough. Let's, oh, wait a minute, look at that. So it came in late. User started, So the agent event, when the agent joined, that didn't come in late. And that, honestly, my internet's kind of acting up today. My answering calls is kind of slow. You guys have seen sometimes when I execute the APIs, it's a little slow. I'm guessing something didn't quite get in right and it just got out of order. So it does look like things are set up though. So luckily that's the case. I want to show you updating triggers. So I'm going to hop back to my API here. We've been doing gets and posts and stuff. I want to do an update of one. So let me disable the customer end trigger. Let's do that one. So I'm going to take. Yeah, go ahead, Tyler.
To point out, we don't guarantee order at all for any of the events that go into the system.
Well, there you go.
Possibly something happened where it just kind of took longer to get through the system, but
yeah, good to know. Thanks. All right, so I'm going to update my user end trigger. I'm actually going to disable it. So I'm going to go to the put operation. Let me scroll to the top here. So this is my put. This is going to update a trigger. I can update any property on the trigger. So I'm going to put my trigger in here. One thing, I've got to modify this because you can't just drop the JSON in. So I'm going to put the trigger ID here and get rid of it out of the JSON. We don't need it there. Get rid of the self URI because that's not necessary. All right, so then I'm going to update this to false. And I'm just going to update the description too. Just for grins, I'll mark it as disabled. So if anybody's looking in there and they don't notice the flag, they can at least see the description that it's disabled. So I'll execute that request. All right, I got a 200 okay. It came back, it sent me back my properties. So it says disabled in the description and it shows disabled in false. Now, let me show you something real quick. Well, I've got this set up. If I were to update this back, if I were to try and put this back as it is right now and just like change these properties, let's set it back, and I try to execute, I'm going to get an error here. And it says incorrect version provided for update. Okay. You didn't notice there is a version property for the triggers. So the version increments as you go. Every update increments the version ID, and you can see that when you get a list of all triggers, it'll show you the current version. So you need to pass in the version you're updating, and it needs to be the current version. My version, as you can see down here in the output, well, I already updated it. My version's 2, and I tried to update version 1, and it didn't like that. So to really do an update on the current version, I would have to change that to 2, change the properties back, and then it would execute. But as it is, if I go back to all of my triggers and execute that, now I should see on the user end trigger, I disabled it, and it has a description of disabled. So if I were to test that now, that trigger's not going to fire because it is, yes, it's defined, but it's not enabled. So Genesys, the backend services are not operating off of that trigger. We're not gonna monitor it. So that's how you do updates of triggers. And delete's pretty straightforward. The delete operation, you just drop a trigger ID in there and delete, and it'll get rid of the triggers. There is one more test operation that I wanted to show you. So on a trigger, so this is an ID. Let me go get the trigger ID of my customer end one, because that has a filter on it. So let me grab that. I copy. All right, so I am going to test that specific trigger. Put the trigger in here. Let me go grab that body for that copy. All right, so I'm going to test that specific trigger. This is the customer, and this is when the customer leaves the conversation. You know, assume Genesys is going to send you that conversation, that reduced conversation JSON. I'm going to execute this test, and what I get a different test script that runs through my trigger, and it says, does the topic is the topic valid? Yes. So it looked at my trigger, it looked at the topic, it is one of the known topics, so it passed that test. Verify the trigger target is correctly configured. So what this did was it looked at the target where I said execute this workflow. So it went to look, did I specify a workflow or something else? You know, if I manually typed in, you know, Salesforce instead of workflow, it would fail because that's not a target it knows about. And it verifies that the workflow ID is right as well. I'm pretty sure, because I think I got that error the other day when I was testing this out. And then the last one is the JSON path. So it takes that input of the conversation object that I had against that trigger, and it parses the JSON path out here, and it actually shows you. So it says, all right, that trigger was using looking at media type equals chat, and it says what did the test think they were looking for? It says, all right, the test thinks you're looking for media type, and it went and got the value based on the JSON that I passed in, and it said the value was chat, that equals, so that matched. So I can use these tools even with a disabled trigger. I can use these tools to somewhat confirm that that trigger should operate as I expect. It should match, it should fire the right workflow, and when I enable it, if I perform live testing, it should work. It's just these two posts, this post for testing a specific trigger and this post for testing a topic with a payload should help you to initially test before you put something in production. Because once you put it in production, once you enable that and it's going, it is going to run. So, and it is possible to create a trigger that will take up resources. So Tyler, you might be able to speak to this a bit. What kind of throttling and things did we put into place? Because I remember when triggers were in beta, like one of the first triggers I created went haywire. I think I was kind of in an infinite loop. And
Yeah.
I had to figure out how to disable it quickly because it was just consuming resources.
Yeah, we've since put some guardrails around that. So for a particular entity ID, so like for a particular conversation ID, trigger can only fire a certain number of times. We keep track of that so you don't run into some runaway situation. And then we also have limits around how many workflows you can trigger, you can fire or invoke from triggers per hour and per minute. And there's some defined limits on that throughout our APIs and stuff.
Okay. I wonder if those are on here. So if we look under operational conditions, sometimes that's on here, resource limits. So following limits apply. You guys can go look at the rate limits and the platform API limits for any API requests. That's all that information is always under operation information. So on any given API that we have, you can click on operation information. It'll tell you, what permissions or what scopes you need based on your OAuth client. It'll also give you resource limits that you can look at. How many can you do per token? How many per minute? How much data, et cetera. So we do have a fair use policy at Genesys. If you haven't looked at that, we don't allow any one customer to come in and take all the resources away from all the other customers. So there's, like Tyler said, there's some guardrails around things that you can look at here to understand what might happen if you're doing things out of bounds. So with that, let me verify that I have shown you everything that I wanted to show you. All right, we did all the media types, created some triggers, we updated them, we disabled them. Looks pretty good. So with that, we're like 10 minutes to the top of the hour. I think I've shown you everything. I hope I've shown you enough for you to make that leap to the next step. So, if you're a Genesys customer and you want to update a third-party system, you don't want to have an external executable using the notification API or the event bridge. You really just want Genesys to call your system once some event happens. This is a great tool for that. It really eases the amount of what you have to do, right? You don't have to host any code. You don't have to run any code. You don't have to maintain any code. Genesys is going to take care of at least the Genesys side of things for you now. When you're calling your external system, it's up to you what that system's capable of doing. But I hope you see how you can use those events. One thing I did not show you, getting a list of the triggers, trigger topics. So our documentation, this is really a subset. This is not all the triggers. There was one I was looking at here. So you don't see user start in this list. Okay, so user start is a valid trigger, but it's not. This is just a selection of topics, and we're adding more. We may be adding more. So we actually have an API that you can call get API v2 process automation trigger topics and execute that, and it will just return to you all of the currently defined topics. And there you can see user start is there. So as we add more, this API will get updated. We should update our docs as well to keep those in line. But you can always come to the source of truth. The source of truth is the API. It'll always tell you what's available out there. So I'm going to go to the Q&A panel. If you guys have any questions, please post something into the Q&A. Let's try and answer those here real quick. It says, it looks like the user start message did publish to the chat room just after a delay. Yeah, Melody, thanks. Yeah, it did. Yeah, as Tyler said, order isn't guaranteed. So, you know, just be aware of that, and that may or may not be okay. What you may do is, you know, if order is important, you might just look at one trigger or something to key off of. So let's see. The next one, does each trigger that gets invoked count as part of the customer's API usage? I don't think triggers count against API usage, but
yeah,
if you're calling an architect workflow and it's calling a Genesys Cloud data action, that does count. that's an API hit against the OAuth token linked to that data action. So that will count against your quota limits for API usage. All right. And then Dan says, so is there a potential for delay between the event occurs and the triggers called? I'm wondering about this application for real-time use cases. Yeah. So understand, we've got a service in the back end of Genesys that's running, that's kind of operating kind of like the notification API. So it's not really the notification API. We're listening directly on whatever our event bus is, Kafka or whatever, picking those events off and processing. But you can, in concept, it's working like that. It should get the events. The only time, you know, apparently order's not guaranteed, but you should get the events unless, you know, maybe you're abusing the system and throttling kicks in and events are discarded or something like that. So Dan, I know that's not a great answer. If you're building something for production that must know when every call starts or something like that, you might want to look at the notification API or the event bridge. Event bridge is probably the best for that, because that is guaranteed. There's store and forward. If disconnects happen, you'll get things in order. Order is guaranteed on event bridge, that kind of thing. So your mileage may vary with triggers, at least for right now. Where do I find the recording after the call to share with others? So Katie, if you go, well, let me show y'all. I can just show you. So on the Developer Center, let's say you guys go to developer.genesys.cloud and you go to the videos. It's this big icon right here on the front. Give it a second to load up. Why is it not loading? Oh, there it is. All right. So we have a couple of different, so dev drops. Dev drops are something the Developer Center team, the team that manages the site, those are ones they do. These are dev drops are 10 to 15 minute conversations showing you a quick topic, something you can watch during lunch while you're eating your sandwich, something you can consume really quick. The devcasts are the ones that I run. They're usually an hour. Usually we dig a little bit deeper. You can get to all the devcasts here. They're also available on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube and you search for devcast or Genesys, well, let's just go see. I've got it bookmarked over here. So the Genesys community, the devcast tutorial series. So you can click on that and you can actually subscribe and kind of get notified when we post new ones out there. So they're all out here on YouTube as well. So you can go look at those anytime. This one probably will be posted Monday or Tuesday. It takes us a few days to get the recording, clean up the recording and put it out there. So just kind of keep an eye on that and you can share that with others. All right. Any plans to add the attribute event in the tree? You know what, Thompson, that is something I was curious about too. That was gonna be a feature request I was gonna ask for, was having the topic sent through to the workflow. That might be a neat enhancement, because then instead of having 4 separate workflows, one for each kind of topic, so you could distinguish, oh, this was a customer start topic as opposed to a customer end topic action. You could have just one workflow. If it passed the topic in, you could have just one workflow and then switch off of the topic. But no, it is not one of the properties, unless I'm wrong, Tyler. We're not passing the topic into the workflow at this point, right?
Yeah, that's not something that we do.
Okay, so yeah, Thompson, that's a good idea. It was actually something I was thinking on the last couple of days. So maybe as time evolves and process automation triggers get a little more love and some additional features, that might be something that gets added in. I would tell you, watch for release notes, watch for announcements on the Developer Center for any of that, and you'll see when updates get made to that API. All right. Any other questions real quick? We got 2 minutes. So if you want a question, if you got a question you wanted it answered, post it in real quick. Tyler, thanks for joining today. I appreciate it. Everyone, I appreciate you all joining with our late notice setup of this being moved from last week. So thanks for joining. With that, there's no additional questions. I will go ahead and close out. This is our last DevCast for the year. We will likely pick up the end of January. So have a good Christmas and New Year's, and hopefully you all get some time off and can enjoy the holidays. And thanks for a great year. We'll see you next year. Take care. Bye-bye.